Thank you, and welcome to the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. I'm Robert McBride. This is Carlos Kalmar, music director of the Oregon Symphony.
Hi.
Yay! Who has come up with a very unusual program for this concert. It's all about stories, a very explicit one in Mozart's Don Giovanni, and more vague and symbolic and emotional and weird poetry in the Britten. I love this music. Thank you for doing that. And then Peer Gynt with Trolls. What is it with stuff like that? You know, the Norwegians have trolls, the Irish have leprechauns. Come on, grow up. These things don't exist. Why do they write stories about
Wait a second.
There's no unicorns either, Carlos. I hate to.
I've been chasing.
We do still have rhinoceroses. There are a few of
Actually,
those.
if you travel to the land of trolls, I have never been to Norway in my life.
I haven't either. You've been to Finland, though.
I have been in Finland, I have been in Sweden, I have been in Iceland.
Wow, but not Norway yet.
Not,
okay.
Well, yeah.
All right. So
but I think there are trolls there.
Well, what do I know?
They look like you and me.
Oh. Well, then we should go meet them.
I think so too.
We should have a pint of something together with the trolls of Norway. So what about this program? This is highly unusual. How did it happen?
It happened because we were actually, this is the third of this storytelling, sound stories that we tell in this season, so it's the last one, and we were looking for something that is a little bit unusual, and we found something in Peer Gynt, or let's say we found something in the way Peer Gynt is done as you see it tonight, because you can do a lot of different ways to do Peer Gynt. First of all, you can play the suites, which is, so Grieg wrote the incidental music to Henrik Ibsen Peer Gynt upon request of Ibsen himself, and then he saw that the music is kind of, some of it is really good, as he said this. He hated the Hall of the Mountain King.
One of the most famous bits.
Which is, of course, the most famous, because he said it smells like cow pie. Go figure.
Are you doing smell-o-vision tonight?
I thought about that.
There's this little scratch and sniff thing on the right page of your program.
No, but he kind of put suites. So you can do that. There are two suites, you can put both suites together if you want. You can actually do the entire thing. Basically without the play, just with a couple of words in between, and it's a full evening. It's a lot of music, that is, and we play maybe 2/3.
So it's not actually
No,
everything.
it's not. Right. No. The entire music of Peer Gynt by Edward Grieg requires, I think, 4 singers, five singers, a chorus, and a big orchestra. I always remember that because I did that once. The Hall in the Mountain King, which is so famous, at the end has these rests that you don't even realize the rests the way Grieg wrote them. But every time there is a rest at the end before the entire piece explodes, somebody shouts something filthy in Norwegian.
There's a tradition I could get behind.
Yeah. So, but it takes, it's a full evening. And now, in our case, the solution of this is, even that is interesting, because, so we found this artist, he's a graphic artist, he's a painter, he's a sculptor, Alexander Polzin, he's German, and he created he also does sets for operas sometimes, and there are sculptures in important parts of the world of his, and he did something with Peer Gynt that is like, well, it's like paintings, collages, moving paintings. So
So it's kind of abstract?
Oh yes,
Okay.
and the point of it is that, of course, Peer Gynt has a story. Meaning Henrik Ibsen's Peer Gynt is a story, complex but still a story. And what you're going to see is not the story. It's not like, oh, this is this, and I follow this. None of that. It's more like reflections on what is happening at different parts of the play and the score, and it requires, in a way, the audience to get involved in a different way, rather than when you sit in a theater and you see and hear a play and you follow the language, and the language tell you, I'm going to dinner with such and such, and you know somebody's going to dinner with such and... No, none of that is visual. It's more slightly in a philosophical way. I think it's very interesting what Paulsen does, and it's for sure the word abstract comes to mind.
There is a sculpture park in Oslo with hundreds of sculptures telling the whole Peer Gynt story. I think that is such a cool idea. Then a big contest, sculptors around the world submitted work. And some of the story is pretty weird. I mean, at one point he gets drunk and falls and hits his head, and there's all this crazy dreamy stuff. So why not have some abstract, crazy, dreamy thing?
In a way, you could think that a story like Peer Gynt could only happen in Norway, with all the trolls. But, so Henrik Ibsen, for the northern part of Europe, meaning Scandinavia, has the same importance as a poet and writer that pretty much William Shakespeare has for English language. I mean, it's that magnitude. And Ibsen, I wouldn't say like everybody who writes in that period of time in the northern part of Europe, but it's very dark and it's really depressing. Now, Peer Gynt is more weird than depressing, and it's a play written in 5 acts, and it was not even intended to be presented on a stage. He didn't write it because of that. He just wrote it so it can be read. Read it. And then he asked Grieg, can you please write incidental music? And Grieg said yes. And it took Grieg way longer than expected, but finally they found something, and Ibsen was very respectful of Grieg, and Grieg really loved working with Ibsen. Finally something premiered in Oslo, and it was great. Now, the story of Peer Gynt, it's kind of complicated. So, Peer Gynt, because the story starts when Peer Gynt is 20, and real troublemaker, compulsive liar, living in a small village somewhere in Norway. And the first thing, and that is also how this evening will start in that part, is he goes and abducts Ingrid, a bride, from a wedding in the village. Not his bride, just to clarify. He just, or better said, he runs off with her.
This fits in well with Don Giovanni, because he tried to do the same thing.
It's pretty much, yeah, it's only Don Giovanni's a slightly older, maybe in his 30s, and Peer Gynt is just a young, hot-headed, and way too much fantasy, and tells stories that have nothing to do with the truth, so he runs away with Ingrid. And he's also the laughing stock of the village. And he's also creating a lot of trouble for his mother, who is kind of a very normal village woman. And so he runs away, and then he hears during the play that his mother is dying. And he comes back, and that's one of the movements that actually everybody knows, Oz's death, which is a beautiful movement. And in the play later, he also goes to the woods, and that is where, because he meets the daughter of the troll king and fathers a child, and then gets rescued by the sister of a girl named Solveig. And Solveig That's where he finds, Peer Gynt finds true love. And Solveig settles in a hut somewhere near the village, and he cannot settle down, absolutely can't, physically. So he says, I'm going to come back, and he takes off, and later in his life, probably in his 40s, goes to Morocco, gets robbed there, amasses a fortune, gets robbed again, has some dealings in Egypt. You hear an Arabian dance, you hear a dance of Anitra, whom he seduces, a lot of trouble. I mean, hothead and liar and way too much imagination. And with a ship, when he is old, he travels back as an old man. And you hear the journey of the ship, which is very dramatic, and the shipwreck is there. And there is also another idea at that point in the play that might be construed as parallel to Don Giovanni, in the sense of, because you know Don Giovanni invites a person whom he killed to a dinner, and the person, a statue, says yes. Something like that happens in Peer Gynt somewhat. And finally he's old, comes back to his village, nobody recognizes him, and he asks around, who is Peer Gynt? And they say, oh, Peer Gynt, that's this compulsive liar, he died long ago. And then he finally finds his way into the woods, where he finds, not for the first time, Solveig, his love, just singing and waiting for him. And that's when he understands that his lifelong chase of, I need this kingdom, I need this fortune, is actually just waiting in the woods for him, and it's this fantastic woman. So that's kind of, it's a weird story. And one thing that I have to mention is, there is a slight disparity between the music and the play, because the music is phenomenally great, but it doesn't do the play justice, in the sense as, because of the beauty, there is this underlying tragic, somber, very weird tone. That doesn't happen in the music. It's just, it warms your heart when you hear this.
Have you ever seen a picture of Ibsen as an old man? He was scary looking. He had those mutton chop kind of things on the side of his head, but let them get really long, and this big hair. He looked like a cross between Wagner and an erupting volcano. He was really kind of scary looking, and it fits right in with some of what you're talking about with this story. And we'll hear a singer in this, who we will also hear on the first half of the concert.
I have to so we invited for this, and we got very lucky to get Jane Archibald here. She's Canadian. And in a way, how I put the program together was, of course, the Peer Gynt, because of the visuals, was way first, and then I looked for a soprano who can sing those very simple, very heartwarming songs of Solveig. They come, it's short, and it comes 3 times, and the last time it comes, it's the end of the piece. And when I realized, well, I actually got lucky, I have a fantastic soprano, I thought, well, since I have a soprano of that kind of magnitude, let's make her work. I mean, because Solveig's songs is 3 times 2.5 minutes. so let's make her work, and that's how I came up with the idea of presenting Les Illuminations, which I mean, this is only for the statistics, but my recollection of this, because I read the program notes for the Oregon Symphony, I saw that it was last done by the Oregon Symphony, I think somewhere in 2011, with Don Upshaw and myself. And I actually say that's not true, unfortunately.
If that happened, I missed it.
No, it's not true, because Don, who is such a fantastic artist, with whom I had worked before, she ran into some health issues back then, and she canceled. I think this is the first time. And I tell you, this song cycle is one of those very rare occasions when I rehearse with, it's a string piece, strings, soprano. When string players come to me and say, I've never heard this piece, this is absolutely stunning music.
This is one of those pieces that I never thought I'd get to hear in concert. I'm so grateful that you're doing it. The writing for strings is fantastic, and the strings sections in the Oregon Symphony are fantastic. So I really want to hear this.
Yeah, I remember yesterday after we were talking a little bit about the experience with this piece, and I said that the great thing about this is when you actually get a really great string section like ours, then the joy of playing this music is even bigger, because the piece is not for string players, it's not the easiest piece in the universe. It is very colorful, very, and so jokingly I have yesterday we did this in Salem, and you actually here will have the pleasure of, you will read, so the piece, by the way, Les Illuminations by Benjamin Britten, written by an Englishman, but it's in French language. Nonetheless, you are going to read an English translation on this big screen that is behind me. Yesterday we didn't have the screen, and I told the audience, you know, never mind. And the never mind has a meaning, because so this is based on Les Illuminations, which is a set of poems, 42 of them, by Arthur Rimbaud. And it's it's very symbolic, abstract poetry. It just creates pictures. There is no such thing as a story. It's more like a kaleidoscope of visiting this part of the world, visiting that part of the world. From what I know, the title, The Illuminations, came from a former lover of Arthur Rimbaud, Paul Verlaine, who was one of the great French poets himself, and who kind of had this idea that illuminations, it's like what the, how do you call this in English, what the painter has in his hand with all the palette. Yeah, it's like that. And there is one recurring sentence in this entire thing, which is, only I have the key to this savage parade, which is the first poem. And that already explains why I say, yeah, you can read the poetry, but never mind. Because it's like, I only have the key to this savage parade, like, huh? I mean, it's pictures, and maybe what it's meant by that is that the artist is the only one who actually understands this completely crazy world. And this comes back several times, and the first time it's like, only I, and the second time it's more, well, maybe I understand. It's different. It's always the same music, but the character changes. And Britten was, this is, by the way, for everybody who is a Britten expert, everybody who is a Britten expert knows that pretty much all of Britten's music that is being sung was written for his partner, Peter Pears. All of it, with the exception of what you hear tonight. This is not written for Peter Pears. Peter Pears was not around when this was written. This is fairly early in Britain.
Yeah, he's in his mid-20s.
Yeah, this is written for a soprano. And he also was kind of specific how he wanted this to be sung, with irony and with this and that. And but it's Britten, and I must say that I came fairly later in my life to really enjoy this composer with all the things that he does. And So if you enjoy this, I'm sure you will encounter, there is one very famous recording by a tenor, Ian Bostridge did one, and I'm sure there is the other piece that is very kind of famous of Britten's song cycles, which is the Serenade for Tenor, Horn and Strings.
You gonna do that one too sometime?
No. Sorry. So
All right, I'll scratch it off my list.
That's the problem when, I mean, I have to say it. The problem is that I have been, I've been here 16 years, and I have 2 years left, and there is only that amount of music that I can do in 2 years. So there is something I have to say no to.
I do have a list for you.
I know, and then the answer is no Mahler 8.
I know.
No.
It's a cool idea, though. The only Mahler symphony he's never done. I mean, come on, we could have given him that, but he doesn't want it. That's okay. I learned something interesting about Britten today, I hadn't known. His father was not musical, his mother was, and his father would never allow either a record player or a radio in their home. So Britten was the last big composer who grew up only with live music. He was either playing it, or his mother was playing it, or he was hearing it in church or a concert or something, never from records or on the radio.
That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
It's actually crazy because immediately I have an association that has nothing to do with that. It has more something to do with, so it's a miracle in a way, or as half a miracle, that Britten became what he became, if his father was so strongly opposed to music, which I don't understand in itself, but it reminds me a little bit of this. I read several stories when I was looking in the repertoire, why on earth don't we have more female composers? And what I found out, which is kind of the obvious, is that until probably 30 years ago, one of the reasons was similar to that, was the oppression by the males. I mean, there were actually talented composers.
Alma Mahler. Gustav said, "You marry me, you're done composing."
Literally, that is what happened. Yeah. So there were talents, and then they got married. Yeah.
Humans are funny. They're funny.
Yeah.
I didn't realize until reading Elizabeth Schwartz's program notes. And one thing that she does that I really like is she tells us the instrumentation for all the pieces. And it says no trombones in Don Giovanni. And I'm thinking, that story, if any story needs trombones dragging the guy to hell, it's Don Giovanni. Did he not use them?
So this is the interesting way of genius instrumentation. So let me just assume for a moment you have heard Don Giovanni, because our colleagues Portland Opera have played it in the last 10 years for sure. And yes, there are trombones in Don Giovanni. And so the overture starts with this very famous D minor chord, which in the opera is literally the moment when the statue, so Don Giovanni sets up a dinner at home, and the statue comes and says, "You invited me, I've come." Trombones. With that music that you are going to hear, first minute you hear tonight is that. So why in the overture is that same music, but without trombones? And the reason is, how do you kind of make a drama a drama? So it's not that the beginning you are going to hear is lighter, but it has a different color. And then you think, okay, you've heard that. Then the overture, when you hear it in an opera house, the ending of the overture is completely different from what you hear tonight. It dies away into the first, and then you have this entire story of Don Giovanni going around seducing women and having trouble, blah, 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 and then killing the commendatore and inviting him in the third act to dinner. Long story, 1 3/4 hours later, the commendatore, the person whom he killed, Don Giovanni, comes to the dinner, and that is where the trombones are, because...
And because they were going to show up late anyway, because they'd been out drinking, because they're trombonists.
And,
right.
Well, it's trombonists. Yeah. And in a way, it's...
What do you call a beautiful woman on a trombonist's arm?
Oh, yeah.
A tattoo. We have to stop, actually. We're out of time.
Yeah, I think this is the moment.
this would be the time. Wah, wah. Thank you for being here. Fascinating concert. And if you enjoyed this conversation, it was videotaped. You can find it on YouTube. Joe Cantrell here with his camera as usual. And tell your friends, please. And your enemies too. What the heck. Carlos Kalmar.
Robert McBride.
And you.
That was great.